Before this story begins, remember one thing. Kate Mercer is not walking into an ordinary storm. Beneath an abandoned polar station, something ancient is waiting in the ice. Something warm, alive, and powerful enough to threaten the entire Earth.
The storm had no right to be there. Cade Mercer had flown rescue missions through Arctic wideouts, Saharan dust walls, and orbital re-entry turbulence that turned metal into prayer, and none of it felt like this. The wind around the abandoned polar station did not howl. It hunted, circling the structure in tightening spirals as if the building itself had been marked. His instruments were dead, his satellite link had cut out mid-transmission, and the sky above him, once a canvas of frozen stars, had gone unnaturally black, like something vast had pressed against it from the other side. He should have turned back hours ago. Instead, he stood at the edge of the ice trench, staring at the fracture that had split the station's foundation open like a wound. The ground had collapsed inward, exposing something buried deep beneath the research facility, something that was never part of any human blueprint. It pulsed faintly beneath layers of frost, a smooth, metallic coffin embedded in ancient ice, radiating a dim, unnatural glow that made the surrounding snow glisten like glass. And it was warm. Cade dropped to one knee, pressing his gloved hand against the surface. Heat bled through the insulation, steady and alive, like a heartbeat that had waited centuries to be heard. That alone should have been impossible. This region hadn't supported any geothermal activity for thousands of years. Whatever lay beneath his hand was generating its own energy, and doing it with a precision that felt deliberate. Then the wind stopped. Not faded. Not weakened. Stopped. Silence crashed over the station so violently it made his ears ring, and for one suspended second, the entire world felt like it had been unplugged. Cade's breath fogged in front of him, slow and heavy, and in that unnatural stillness, the coffin beneath the ice shifted. Not by much. Just enough. A seam along its surface traced itself open with a faint line of light, as if responding to his touch or his presence. Cade froze, every instinct screaming at him to back away, to run, to leave whatever this was buried forever. But something stronger held him there. Something older than fear. The same force that made humans walk into burning buildings and dive into freezing oceans for strangers they had never met. The seam widened. Inside, something moved. He saw it through the frost first, an outline, impossibly tall and impossibly still, like a figure carved from light itself. Then the ice fractured outward with a sharp, crystalline crack, and the coffin opened just enough for him to see her. Blue. Not painted, not reflected, alive. Her skin shimmered with a faint internal glow, like starlight trapped beneath the surface. Her eyes were closed, her form curled protectively inward, both arms wrapped around her abdomen in a gesture so instinctively human it hit him harder than the alienness of everything else. She wasn't just hiding. She was protecting something. Cade's breath caught as a faint pulse of light rippled beneath her hands, brighter than the rest of her body, rhythmic and deliberate. Not random. Not dying. Growing. A sudden burst of static tore through his earpiece, nearly dropping him to the ice. Then a voice came through. Not human. Not mechanical. Cold. Unmistakably aware. Return the vessel, it said, each word carrying a weight that made the air itself feel heavier. Or your world will enter terminal winter. Cade didn't move. Didn't blink. Because the woman inside the coffin just opened her eyes. And the storm came back to life. The moment her eyes opened, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Cade felt it through his boots first, a sharp, invasive cold that cut upward through the ice like something alive, something reacting. The air crystallized around him, every breath turning thick, heavy, reluctant to leave his lungs. It wasn't the storm. The storm had its own rhythm, its own chaotic violence. This was precise. Controlled. Focused entirely on the space between him and the being inside that fractured coffin. Her eyes were not silver like he expected from the glow. They were darker. Not empty, not lifeless, but layered, like looking into deep water where light barely reached. And they were locked on him with an intensity that made his spine tighten, not out of fear alone, but recognition. Not of him specifically, but of something he represented. The threat. Her body moved in a blur. One moment she was curled protectively, the next she was pressed against the far edge of the open chamber, her back to the ice wall, her hands still guarding her abdomen as if the world itself had become hostile in the span of a heartbeat. The glow beneath her skin flared brighter, and the air between them distorted slightly, like heat shimmer, but cold, inverted, unnatural. Cade didn't raise his hands. He didn't speak. Every instinct drilled into him over 15 years of rescue work told him the same thing. Sudden movement gets people killed. It didn't matter that she wasn't human. Fear had a universal language, and right now, she was fluent in it. Another crackle of static surged through his earpiece. Last warning, the voice said, sharper now, closer. You are in possession of classified biological cargo. Return it. Compliance will preserve your planetary ecosystem. Cade's jaw tightened. Preserve. Not protect. Not spare. Preserve. Like Earth was already something they owned. He reached up slowly, deliberately, and pulled the earpiece from his ear. The silence that followed wasn't relief, it was isolation. Whatever was speaking to him, it was still out there, still watching, but now it didn't have a direct line into his head. That mattered, because something else did. He took one careful step back from the coffin. Her reaction was immediate. The glow dimmed, just slightly, but enough to feel it, like a coiled spring loosening a fraction. Not trust. Not yet. But uncertainty had replaced immediate panic, and that was enough. All right, he said quietly, his voice steady despite the way his pulse hammered against his ribs. You're not trapped. The words meant nothing to her. He knew that. But tone carried weight where language failed, and he made sure there was no edge to it. No command. No demand. Just presence. Another step back. Another subtle shift in her posture. Her head tilted, barely, but it was the first sign of something beyond raw survival instinct. Curiosity. Assessment. The same process he was going through, mirrored back at him through alien eyes. The ice beneath the coffin groaned. Cade's attention snapped downward. The fracture that had exposed the structure was widening, hairline cracks spreading outward in thin, branching patterns that glowed faintly with the same light emanating from her skin. This wasn't just a container. It was connected. To what? He didn't know. But whatever system it belonged to had just activated. A low hum vibrated through the ground, subtle at first, then building, resonating through the metal supports of the station above them. It wasn't mechanical in the way human systems were. There was no grinding, no friction. It felt harmonic, like something ancient tuning itself after a long silence. Her eyes flicked past him, upward, toward the surface. And for the first time since she had woken, fear shifted into something sharper. Urgency. She moved again, not away from him this time, but toward the edge of the chamber, one hand gripping the lip of the coffin as she pulled herself up with a grace that defied the stiffness of cryosleep. Her other hand never left her abdomen. Never. Cade followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Just the ceiling of the trench, the fractured remains of the station above, the swirling return of the storm beyond the broken edges. Then the sky changed. Not slowly. Not gradually. Instantly. The blackness above the storm split open in 3 perfect lines of light, descending from orbit with impossible precision. They weren't like meteors. There was no burn, no flare, no chaos. Just controlled descent, 3 objects cutting through the atmosphere as if gravity itself had been rewritten to accommodate them. Cade's breath stilled, because he knew exactly what that meant. They weren't bluffing. They were already here.
So far, Cade Mercer has discovered a metallic coffin beneath the polar station, awakened a mysterious blue-scaled angel woman, and heard a terrifying warning: return the vessel or Earth will enter the terminal winter. But now the threat is no longer distant. 3 objects have descended from orbit, and whatever has been hunting her has finally reached Earth.
Behind him, the alien woman made a sound. Not a word. Not a cry. Something deeper. Something that carried grief, recognition, and a kind of exhausted certainty all at once. She knew what was coming. And worse, she knew she hadn't escaped it. The first impact didn't shake the ground. It silenced it. Cade felt it ripple through the ice like a pressure wave without sound, a distortion that made his teeth ache and his vision stutter for a fraction of a second. The storm above twisted violently, as if something had pierced through it and claimed the airspace as its own. Then the light came, cold, vertical beams cutting down through the blizzard, turning the swirling snow into suspended particles that hovered unnaturally, frozen mid-fall. They weren't just landing. They were rewriting the environment. Cade stepped instinctively toward the woman, placing himself between her and the open trench without fully understanding why. It wasn't a calculated decision. It was reflex, the same reflex that had dragged strangers out of wreckage and pulled survivors from collapsing ice shelves. Behind him, the air shifted. He turned just enough to see her standing now, fully upright, her height surpassing his by several inches, her form no longer curled in fear but held with a fragile, deliberate control. The glow beneath her skin had intensified, pulsing in soft waves that moved in rhythm with something deeper, something tied to the life she was protecting. Her eyes were no longer fixed on him. They were locked on the sky. Another beam struck the surface. This time, the ice responded. A deep, resonant crack split outward across the frozen ground, not random, not chaotic, but geometric, forming patterns that echoed the faint markings on the coffin behind them. The trench widened, and for a split second, Cade saw something beneath the ice, vast, structured, and undeniably artificial. Not human. Not recent. Older than anything that should exist beneath Earth's poles. Yeah, Cade muttered under his breath, the realization settling in like a weight he couldn't shake. You didn't just land here by accident. The woman's head snapped toward him. Not confused. Not defensive. Focused. As if she understood something in his tone, if not the words themselves. A sharp burst of movement cut through the air. Kay didn't see it at first. He felt it. A sudden drop in temperature directly behind him, followed by a pressure shift so abrupt it forced him to stumble forward. He spun, heart slamming against his ribs, just in time to see the thing emerge from the beam of light. It wasn't solid. Not entirely. A tall, humanoid silhouette composed of shifting darkness, its edges dissolving into the air like smoke pulled too tight. Where it moved, frost spread instantly, crawling across the ice in branching veins that devoured what little heat remained. Its form flickered between shapes, never settling, never fully defined. And it was looking directly at her. Not at him. Not at the station. At her. The woman reacted before Cade could even process what he was seeing. Light exploded from her body. Not outward in a blast, but forward, concentrated, a beam of pure luminescence that carved through the space between them and struck the entity with surgical precision. The air screamed, not audibly, but in a way that bent perception, distorting the edges of reality itself. The shadow recoiled. Not destroyed. Not even damaged in any visible way. But disrupted. Its form destabilized, flickering violently as the light tore through it, forcing it back toward the beam from which it had emerged. For a brief moment, the trench was filled with opposing forces, cold and light, shadow and energy, each pushing against the other in a silent, violent standoff. Cade didn't hesitate. He grabbed the nearest loose metal rod from the wreckage and hurled it straight into the beam. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't meant to be. It was a test. The rod hit the edge of the light and vanished instantly, not melting, not breaking, gone. No debris. No reaction. Just absence, as if the space it entered no longer allowed matter to exist in any form Cade understood. Right, he said, breath tight. So that's off the table. Behind him, the woman staggered. The light she had unleashed flickered, then dimmed, her body trembling as if the effort had drained something vital. Her hand snapped back to her abdomen, the glow beneath her skin surging protectively in response, brighter than before, almost defensive. The entity noticed. Of course it did. Its form restabilized, slower this time, more deliberate, as if it had adjusted to her attack. It didn't rush forward. It didn't strike. It watched. Calculated. Then it moved again. Faster. Cade stepped directly into its path. No weapon that could matter. No plan that could work. Just instinct. The entity's motion halted a fraction of a second before reaching him, its shifting form bending around his silhouette like it was encountering resistance that shouldn't exist. For the briefest moment, it acknowledged him, not as prey, not as a target, but as an anomaly. Something unexpected. Something irrelevant. And that was enough. Because in that hesitation, the woman moved. She reached him. Not past him. Not away from him. To him. Her hand collided with his chest, not violently but urgently, her glowing skin pressing against his jacket as that strange, electric sensation surged through him again. Stronger this time, deeper, like something was trying to synchronize rather than repel. Images flashed. Not clearly. Not fully. But enough. A sky filled with light. A world collapsing into shadow. Figures like her, dozens, hundreds, falling, fading, extinguished. And at the center of it all, something beneath ice. Waiting. Cade gasped, the connection snapping as quickly as it had formed. The woman pulled back, her eyes wide, not with fear this time, but realization. She knew now. Not everything. But enough. Enough to understand that he wasn't just a random human in the wrong place at the wrong time. Enough to understand that he was part of something she had come here for. Above them, the remaining two beams intensified. And more shapes began to form inside them. They weren't sending one hunter. They were sending an extraction force. And this time, they weren't going to hesitate. The second and third entities did not descend with hesitation. They arrived with purpose. The beams above intensified into solid columns of controlled annihilation, and within them, the shapes began to take form, taller than the first, denser, more stable, their silhouettes less distorted, as if they had already adapted to Earth's environment. The first had been a probe, Cade realized too late. These were enforcers. The air collapsed inward as they stepped out of the light, and for the first time, sound returned, not from the storm, but from them. A low, resonant vibration that didn't travel through the ears, but through bone, a frequency that made Cade's muscles tense involuntarily, as if his body recognized something his mind could not. Behind him, the woman's grip tightened on his jacket. Not out of fear alone. Out of warning. The first entity shifted position, moving in coordination with the new arrivals, forming a loose triangular formation that boxed them in within the trench. There was no rush, no chaotic aggression. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and terrifyingly patient. They weren't here to fight. They were here to retrieve. Cade exhaled slowly, forcing his breathing to stabilize despite the rising pressure in his chest. Panic wouldn't help. Panic never helped. He had survived collapsing ice fields, burning wreckage, and zero-visibility rescues because he knew when to think and when to act. This was a thinking moment. Okay, he muttered under his breath, eyes flicking between the entities, the widening cracks in the ice, and the partially exposed structure beneath them. You want her alive. That's leverage. The woman's glow pulsed once, sharply, as if reacting to the tone rather than the words. He didn't look back at her. Not yet. If these things were watching her, tracking her reactions, he couldn't give them anything they didn't already have. One of the enforcers moved. Not toward her. Toward him. Cade felt the temperature plummet as it approached, frost spreading across the ice in a perfect radius around its form. The air distorted again, that same absence of matter where the beam had erased the metal rod. This close, he could see that the entity wasn't just shadow. It was consuming light, drawing it inward, bending it around itself, leaving nothing behind but void where illumination should have existed. It stopped an arm's length away. If it had arms. If it had a face. If it had anything human enough to define. Human, the voice returned, no longer through the earpiece, but directly into the space around him, layered and precise. Step aside. Cade didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't even shift his weight. Because stepping aside wasn't neutral. It was surrender. And something about the way the woman's hand pressed against his back, tight, desperate, unyielding, told him exactly what surrender meant for her. No, he said, his voice steady in a way he didn't entirely feel. A pause followed. Not long. But long enough to matter. The entity tilted, just slightly, as if recalibrating its assessment. Then the pressure in the air increased, subtle but undeniable, like gravity itself had intensified around him. "Non-compliance is inefficient," it replied. "Your species lacks the capacity to influence this outcome." Cade almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. He had heard variations of that statement his entire career. In burning cockpits, in collapsing structures, in situations where survival odds dropped to zero before the mission even began. Humans weren't supposed to make a difference. And yet, "We're pretty good at inefficient," he said quietly. The entity moved. Too fast. Cade barely registered the motion before a tendril of absolute cold wrapped around his arm, not gripping, not crushing, but phasing through the fabric of his jacket and into his skin. Pain didn't come first. Absence did. Sensation vanished where it touched him, replaced by a hollow void that spread upward toward his shoulder. Then the woman's light exploded again. Not as controlled as before. Not as precise. This time, it was instinct. Violent. The beam slammed into the entity mid-motion, forcing it backward, its form destabilizing more violently than before. The tendril around Cade's arm dissolved instantly, sensation flooding back in a painful rush that made him stagger. He caught himself, breath sharp, vision swimming. Behind him, the woman faltered. Harder this time. Her glow flickered erratically, the pulse beneath her hands surging in response, brighter, faster, as if compensating for her instability. She dropped to one knee, her entire body trembling under the strain. And that's when the second entity moved. Not toward her. Toward the ice. It extended part of its form downward, touching the fractured surface where the glowing patterns had spread. The moment it made contact, the cracks accelerated, racing outward in precise lines that mirrored the geometry beneath them. Cade's stomach dropped. "They're not just here for you," he realized aloud. The woman's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto his with sudden, sharp understanding. Another pulse of light surged beneath the ice. Stronger. Deeper. Responding. The structure below wasn't dormant anymore. It was waking up. And the entities? They weren't trying to avoid it. They were activating it. The third enforcer shifted position, aligning itself with the others, their triangular formation now centered not on the woman, but on the expanding fracture beneath their feet. Primary objective updated, the voice stated, colder now, more focused. Asset retrieval remains priority. Secondary objective, system acquisition. Cade's pulse spiked. System. Not structure. Not artifact. System. Which meant, whatever's under this ice, he said, backing up instinctively, it's not just old. It's operational. The woman struggled to stand, forcing herself upright despite the tremor in her limbs. Her light stabilized slightly, but it was weaker now, stretched thin between defense and something else, something connected to the growing pulse beneath them. She looked at him. Really looked this time. And in her eyes, there was no confusion left. Only urgency. And something dangerously close to recognition. Above them, the beams flared brighter. More shapes forming. More enforcers preparing to descend. This wasn't an extraction anymore. It was an invasion. And whatever lay beneath the ice. It was the real target. Cade swallowed hard, the weight of that realization settling into something cold and undeniable. They hadn't followed her to Earth. She had led them here. The ground did not just crack. It answered. The pulse beneath the ice surged upward in a wave so powerful that it forced all three entities to shift their stance at once, their forms flickering as if the very physics they depended on had been momentarily disrupted. The geometric fractures spread faster now, carving precise lines across the trench floor, forming a pattern far too complex to be natural and far too intentional to be random. Cade staggered back as a section of ice collapsed inward. Not crumbling. Receding. As if something below had withdrawn the support deliberately. A deep cavity opened beneath them, revealing layers of structure that extended far beyond what the station above could ever justify. Metallic surfaces, smooth and seamless, arranged in concentric rings that pulsed with faint light that matched the glow beneath the woman's skin with unsettling accuracy. This was not a crash site. This was not debris. This was a system that had been buried, sealed, and forgotten on purpose. And it had just recognized her. The woman let out a sound that wasn't fear. It was memory. She stepped forward without thinking, her hand reaching toward the exposed structure as if drawn by something deeper than instinct. The moment her fingers hovered over the surface, the entire chamber beneath the ice illuminated. Bright, alive, responsive. The entities reacted instantly. All three moved at once, converging, not on her this time, but on the opening. Cade's mind snapped into motion. "They're not just after you," he said, the realization hitting with brutal clarity. "They need this thing to finish whatever they started." The woman turned to him, her eyes blazing brighter than before, not with panic, but with something far more dangerous. Understanding. She moved again, faster than he could track, placing herself between the opening and the entities. Her light flared outward, not as a beam this time, but as a barrier, a thin, shimmering field that bent the space around it, distorting the advancing shadows just enough to slow them. But it wasn't enough. The first entity pushed through. Not easily. Not without resistance. But it adapted mid-contact, its form reshaping, compressing, finding a way through the distortion like liquid forcing itself through a narrowing gap. Cade didn't hesitate. He grabbed a broken support strut and drove it into the exposed edge of the structure. Not to damage it, to interrupt it. The reaction was immediate. The light beneath the ice surged violently, the pattern destabilizing for a fraction of a second, just enough to disrupt the synchronization between the system and the entities. The one pushing through the barrier faltered, its form snapping back violently as if repelled. Cade blinked. "That did something," he muttered. The woman stared at him, then at the strut, then back at him, and something shifted in her expression. Not confusion, not surprise, recognition. She stepped toward him, closing the distance in a single fluid motion, and placed both hands against his chest again. This time, the connection didn't flash. It held. The world around him dissolved into fragments of light and memory, not his own, not entirely hers, but shared, overlapping in ways that made his mind strain to keep up. He saw her world. Not as it had fallen. As it had been. Vast cities built from living light, structures that responded to thought, energy flowing like rivers through the sky itself. A civilization that didn't just use technology, it became it. Then the shift. Darkness. Not invading. Emerging. From within. Figures like the entities above, but more numerous, more chaotic, tearing through that perfect world with surgical precision. Not destroying randomly, but targeting systems, infrastructures, control points. Taking over. Repurposing. And at the center of it all, a system identical to the one beneath the ice. Buried. Hidden. Protected. The last one. The memory snapped back violently. Cade gasped, the trench slamming back into focus around him as the connection broke. He staggered, catching himself on the edge of the fracture, his mind racing to process what he had just seen. "She didn't run," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "She escaped with the key." The woman nodded. Just once. Her hand moved to her abdomen, the glow beneath her skin flaring brighter than ever before. Not just life. Not just a child. A link. Cade's gaze snapped back to the exposed structure. Then to the entities. Then to the sky, where more beams were beginning to form. "They're not here to kill you," he said, the weight of it settling in. "They're here to use you." The voice returned instantly, sharper now, more urgent. "Correct." Cade froze. The entity closest to him shifted, its form stabilizing further, its edges sharpening into something almost defined. Biological interface required for full system activation, it continued. Compliance ensures optimal efficiency. Cade felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear. Clarity. He looked at the woman. At the way she stood, exhausted but unyielding, her entire body positioned between the system and the things that wanted to claim it. At the way her hand never left her abdomen. At the way she had chosen this planet. Not because it was safe. Because it was the last place the system could be activated without falling into the wrong hands. And no, they were here anyway. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself as the ground beneath them continued to hum, the ancient system waking further with every passing second. "All right," he said quietly, his voice carrying a different weight now. "Then we stop them from ever turning it on." The entity tilted again. Curious. Analyzing. "You lack the capacity," it repeated. Cade met it head-on. For the first time, he smiled. "Yeah," he said. "That's what everyone says right before we ruin their plans." Behind him, the system pulsed again. Stronger. Closer. And somewhere deep beneath the ice, something vast began to come online. The system did not wake all at once. It unfolded. Cade felt it before he saw it, a layered activation rippling outward beneath the ice, like something ancient stretching after a very long sleep. The hum deepened into a resonant vibration that climbed through the structure, through his boots, through his bones, until it felt like his entire body had become part of the signal. The exposed rings below shifted. Not physically. Functionally. Light patterns reconfigured, tightening into more complex geometries, streams of energy flowing along pathways that had remained dormant for centuries. What had looked like a buried relic moments ago now behaved like a network. Responsive, adaptive, aware. And it was reacting to her. The woman staggered again, her glow flickering as the pulse beneath her skin intensified in direct synchronization with the system. She wasn't just connected. She was being read. Cade moved to steady her, one arm supporting her as her knees threatened to give out, but the moment his hand touched her shoulder, the energy surged violently. Not outward. Through him. His vision fractured again, but this time the images didn't overwhelm him. They aligned. Coordinates. Structures. Pathways. Not memories. Instructions. He ripped his hand away with a sharp breath, heart racing. "Okay," he said, voice tight but focused. "So it talks, but not in a way I can ignore." The entities didn't wait. All three advanced at once. Faster now. More aggressive. The moment the system began stabilizing, their movements shifted from cautious retrieval to decisive acquisition. The triangular formation collapsed inward as they closed the distance, their forms elongating, stretching toward the exposed structure like shadows drawn to a source of power. The woman reacted instantly, forcing herself upright, her light flaring into a barrier again, but weaker this time, thinner, the strain obvious in every trembling motion. Cade saw it. So did they. The first entity struck the barrier. This time, it didn't hesitate. Its form compressed, then forced through with brute adaptation, tearing a ripple through the light that sent shockwaves across the trench. The barrier shattered in fragments of luminescence, scattering like broken glass into the air. Cade moved before he could think. He grabbed the same support strut he had used before and drove it down again, harder, deeper, into the exposed seam of the system. The reaction was immediate, violent. The entire structure surged, light flaring in chaotic bursts as if rejecting an incorrect input. The entity mid-breach recoiled violently, its form destabilizing again, forced back by the sudden disruption. Cade didn't stop. He dragged the strut across the surface, carving through the glowing patterns, not randomly, but following the fragments of instruction that still lingered in his mind. It wasn't damage. It was interference. And it worked. For a moment. A small one. But enough. The system shifted again, recalibrating, the light patterns adjusting to compensate for his intrusion. The hum deepened further, no longer passive, no longer neutral. Now it was resisting. The second entity lunged. Not at the system. At him. Cade barely had time to react before the air around him collapsed, the same absence of matter forming at the edge of its reach. He twisted instinctively, the tendril grazing his side instead of his chest, and where it touched, the fabric of his jacket, and the skin beneath, simply ceased to exist for a fraction of a second. Pain hit a heartbeat later. He stumbled back, breath ripping from his lungs as sensation flooded in violently. Behind him, the woman screamed. Not in fear. In defiance. Her light erupted again, brighter than before despite the strain, fueled by something deeper now, not just her own strength, but the pulse beneath her hands. The glow from her abdomen intensified, radiating outward in waves that synchronized with the system below. The third entity paused. Just for a moment. And in that moment, Cade understood. "It's the kid," he said, forcing himself upright despite the pain. "They're reacting to the kid." The voice answered immediately. "Correct." Cade's eyes snapped to the nearest entity as it stabilized again, its form sharper now, more defined, adapting in real time to the resistance they were putting up. "Primary interface located," it continued. "Activation imminent." The woman staggered forward, her entire body shaking as the energy coursing through her began to spiral out of control. The glow beneath her skin surged brighter, then flickered erratically, as if something inside her was trying to synchronize faster than her body could handle. Cade moved to her side again, ignoring the risk. "You're not just connected," he said, voice tight as he supported her weight. "You're the trigger." Her eyes locked onto his. And for the first time since he had found her, there was fear. Not for herself. For what was about to happen. The ground beneath them split wider. Not from damage. From activation. A massive section of ice collapsed entirely, revealing a deeper chamber below, vast and structured, extending far beyond the limits of the trench. Rings within rings, layers of systems interlocking, all converging toward a central core that pulsed with blinding intensity. And at its center, a hollow space, perfectly shaped, waiting for insertion. Cade finished under his breath. The entities moved as one. No hesitation. No delay. They surged forward, abandoning caution entirely as they converged on her, their forms stretching, reaching, adapting with terrifying speed. Cade stepped in front of her again. Not because it would stop them, but because it would slow them. And right now, that was enough. "Yeah," he said, breath steady despite the chaos closing in around them. "We're officially out of time." Above them, the beams multiplied. More descending. More coming. And below, the system reached a critical threshold. The hum became a roar. And something deep within the core locked onto her completely. The moment the system locked onto her, everything changed. The light beneath the ice surged upward in a violent column, not like the controlled beams from the sky, but raw, ancient, overwhelming. It engulfed her instantly, lifting her off the ground in a suspension of pure energy, her body arched as if caught between two opposing forces. Cade shouted her name, though he had never been given one. It didn't matter. The sound was swallowed by the rising resonance as the system began to complete itself. The hollow space at the center below flared open, its geometry aligning perfectly with her suspended form. Every pulse from her body answered the system, and every response from the system fed back into her, accelerating the connection beyond anything she could control. This wasn't activation anymore. It was assimilation. The entities surged forward. All restraint gone. Their forms sharpened into something closer to structure, less shadow, more defined, like they were shedding inefficiencies in real time as the system reached its final state. One reached the edge of the light column and pushed through, its form destabilizing violently but still advancing. Cade moved. Not strategically. Not logically. Just humanly. He grabbed the nearest exposed conduit, a thick, glowing strand of energy embedded in the fractured structure, and ripped it free. The pain hit instantly. Not physical. Neurological. As if his entire nervous system had been plugged into something far too large for it to handle. Light surged through the conduit, through his hands, into his body, and for a split second he understood. Not the full system. Not its origin. But its intent. Defense. Preservation. Selection. It wasn't waiting for just any interface. It was waiting for the right one. Cade roared through clenched teeth and slammed the conduit into the surface beside the core. The effect was immediate. The system faltered. Not shut down. Not broken. But confused. The perfect synchronization between the woman and the core stuttered, the light column flickering as conflicting inputs clashed within it. The entity pushing through the column recoiled violently, its form tearing apart at the edges as the energy destabilized. Cade dropped to one knee, gasping, his body shaking from the backlash. "Yeah," he rasped, forcing himself upright. "You didn't plan for interference, did you?" The voice came again. Faster now. Less controlled. Human variable, anomalous, recalibrating. Let them recalibrate. Because recalibration took time. And time was the only thing they had left. Above, more entities began to descend, but slower now, as if the system's instability had disrupted their entry protocols. The beams flickered, losing their perfect precision for the first time since arrival. Cade looked up once, then back at her. She was still suspended, still trapped in that column of light, her body trembling under the strain. The glow beneath her skin had reached a blinding intensity, her abdomen radiating like a miniature star. And her eyes, they found his. Through the light, through the chaos. And in them, he saw something that hit harder than everything else combined. Not fear, not pain. A question, not spoken, but unmistakable. Will you let this happen? Cade swallowed, the weight of it pressing into him harder than the crushing cold, harder than the entities closing in, harder than the system threatening to consume her entirely. Because for the first time, he understood the real choice. Let the system complete its activation through her, and give the enemy exactly what they came for. Or stop it, and risk losing the only thing that could fight them at all. The nearest entity moved again, forcing its way through the unstable light, adapting faster now, its form stabilizing despite the interference. Time was gone. Options were gone. All that was left was decision. Cade forced himself to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest as he reached for the conduit again. "Hey," he said, his voice rough but steady, locking his gaze onto hers through the storm of light. "I don't know your name." The energy around her surged. Unstable. Dangerous. "And I don't know what that thing down there really is." Another pulse. Stronger. "But I do know one thing." He stepped forward. Into the edge of the light. Pain exploded instantly, searing through him as reality itself seemed to reject his presence. Still, he kept moving. They don't get to decide how this ends. The entity lunged. Closer now. Almost through. Cade reached her. His hand closing around hers inside the light. The connection detonated. Not like before. Not controlled. Not filtered. Everything hit at once. Her memories. The system. The child. The war. The purpose. And buried beneath it all, the truth. Cade's eyes widened as understanding crashed into him. "Wait," he whispered, breath catching. "This isn't a weapon." The system surged again. The entities closed in. And the realization hit him fully, just as everything reached the point of no return.
Now the truth is closing in. The alien woman is not just protecting herself, she is carrying a living link to the buried system beneath the ice. And the shadow entities want to enforce the system open. Cade has stepped into the light, taken her hand, and seen the war, the child, and the purpose. But the final revelation has not landed yet. This ancient power may not be a weapon at all.
"It's not a weapon," Cade breathed, the realization cutting through the pain like clarity forged in fire. "It's a choice." The system reacted. Not to the words. To the understanding behind them. The light column shifted instantly, no longer pulling her downward toward the core, but expanding outward, the energy stabilizing into something far more controlled. The violent pull that had been dragging her toward assimilation softened, reshaping into alignment instead of consumption. The entities reacted with immediate urgency. All three surged forward at once, abandoning all remaining caution as their forms hardened further, their edges sharpening into something almost physical. They weren't trying to retrieve her anymore. They were trying to force the outcome. Interface must complete. The voice pressed, now fractured, layered with multiple tones as if several processes were speaking at once. Delay results in system denial. Kay didn't look at them. He didn't need to. For the first time since this began, his focus was absolute. On her. On the connection. On the truth that had just been forced into his mind. The system beneath the ice wasn't built to be controlled. It was built to choose. And it wasn't choosing her. It was choosing through her. "Hey," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of energy tearing through his body. "You've been trying to protect it this whole time, haven't you?" Her grip tightened around his hand. The glow around her pulsed, not violently, but in rhythm, like something finally synchronizing the right way. Not forced. Accepted. They thought you were the key, he continued, stepping closer despite the resistance of the light. But you're not the key. The system surged again. Not upward. Outward. The rings beneath the ice rotated for the first time, aligning into a new configuration, the hollow space at the center shifting, no longer shaped for her. Reshaped for something else. For choice. For anyone who would protect instead of control, Cade finished. The entities reached the edge of the column. And this time, they were rejected. Not pushed back. Not resisted. Denied. The light didn't bend around them. It ignored them. As if they no longer existed within the parameters required for activation. Their forms destabilized violently, flickering in and out of cohesion as the system recalibrated without them. Impossible, the voice fractured further. Human biological structure incompatible. Cade stepped forward, fully into the core of the light. Yeah, he said, a faint, defiant grin cutting through the strain on his face. We get that a lot. The connection surged again. This time, it didn't overwhelm him. It aligned. The system flooded through him, not as control, not as dominance, but as recognition. His thoughts didn't command it. His instincts didn't override it. They matched it. Rescue. Protection. Defiance. The same impulses that had driven him into impossible situations his entire life were the exact parameters the system had been waiting for. Not perfection. Not superiority. The light exploded outward. Not destructively. Decisively. The entire polar region ignited in a wave of controlled brilliance, the buried system fully awakening as its true form unfolded beneath the ice. Massive structures rose from the depths, ancient constructs breaking through the frozen surface like titans emerging from hibernation. The beams in the sky shattered. Not by force. By irrelevance. The entities screamed, not audibly, but in the collapse of their forms, as the system redefined the space around them. Their connection to whatever dimension had birthed them severed instantly, their existence unraveling as if the rules they depended on had been revoked. One by one, they vanished. Gone. Not destroyed. Erased. The storm above dissolved into stillness. The sky returned. And for the first time since this began, silence felt natural again. Cade collapsed to one knee, the light receding from his body in slow, controlled waves. The system stabilized, its massive structures settling into a dormant active state, alive but no longer overwhelming. He looked up. She was still there. Still suspended, but gently now, the energy around her soft, supportive instead of consuming. The glow beneath her skin had calmed, steady and strong, the pulse from her abdomen no longer frantic. Slowly, she descended. Her feet touched the ice without a sound. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she stepped forward. Her hand reached for his again, but this time, there was no surge, no overwhelming connection. Just warmth. Just presence. Her eyes held his. And in them, for the first time, she placed his hand against her abdomen. The light beneath her skin responded instantly, brighter, stronger, not as defense, but as acknowledgement. A future. Cade exhaled, the weight of everything settling into something quieter, something deeper. Guess that makes us part of the same problem now, he said, voice rough but steady. Her lips curved slightly, not fully human, not entirely alien, but unmistakably understanding. Above them, the sky stretched clear and endless. Below them, the system waited, awake, watching, ready. Not as a weapon, not as a tool, but as a guardian. And for the first time in its existence, it had chosen humanity.
In the end, the ancient system did not choose strength, control, or conquest. It chose protection. It chose Cade Mercer because his first instinct was not to possess power, but to stand between danger and someone defenseless. That is the heart of the story. Humanity's greatest force is not its weapon, but its choice to protect life when surrender would be easier.